All right, well, I'm going to do the thing where I record on all of the places. We're fully live and direct. Welcome to the Conversation Factory, you all, and welcome back to the Conversation Factory. I guess if we're going to go in alphabetical order, you actually get to go first, Aaron, with the tell us about you and why critique is important to you. We'll just do a quick whip around just so everyone's oriented to the people in the room. How's that sound?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. My name is Aaron Irizarry. I'm the head of service and platforms design at Capital One. And for me, critique is crucial to the conversations we have about our work, to use as a measurement tool to see where we are making strides in the right direction, as well as where we might need to adjust. And so I just think it's such a key component to the conversations we have and the things we build.
As we'd say in my men's group, I agree. Aniruddha, say hello to the fam. Welcome aboard.
Perfect.
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm Aniruddha Kadam. I'm a senior product design manager at LinkedIn. And I believe critique is important because it does leverage the strength of the entire team to drive that iteration and improvement. And it brings different skills and expertise to create space for like a thoughtful discussion on the problem solving approach.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Kristen Penny, and I lead a design education team at Workday. I'm always thinking about things from the lens of education and how to upskill our designers and researchers. So that is one of the reasons critique is really important to me, as I see this as a muscle that we want our design team members to constantly be practicing and building towards, with that ultimate goal of having amazing products out there that are helping to improve our users' experiences.
So there are so many key words, but three that came out to me was thoughtful, conversations, and a muscle. And I think this goes into this question of why is it important to have a culture of critique, like a real habit of it. And I guess the question is like, what are some of the barriers to having it be a muscle, a natural response to host, to invite, to curate these kind of thoughtful conversations as a matter of course? And that's just, popcorn style or Quaker style, actually, whenever the spirit moves you.
I'll say for me, it's tough because it's a conversation, and conversations are had by people, and people come on sometimes in an exciting way with diverse lenses, experiences, and things that influence how they approach certain things, which the more of that diversity and inclusivity we have, the richer conversations we can have. At the same time, when we're having conversations, that also means people may come with different anxieties, different fears, different experiences that have impacted them. And so to build a consistent culture around something that can often make people feel uncomfortable, or is it seen as an uncomfortable situation, it comes with a set of challenges. And that's why creating a culture for it that is inviting and safe. And even if I know it's inviting, but I'm not feeling too comfortable because I'm new to this, or I'm passionate about my work and I don't want to have it be looked at through a critical lens, at least I know that when I go there, the culture is such that it lends to a more productive conversation.
I think I would totally plus one that. And you spoke about building a muscle, and the way you build a muscle is you become uncomfortable, your muscle gets trained to do it over and over time. So there's a routine, there's a structure. So it feels uncomfortable at first, but as you kind of like build in that routine and that structure to it, it just becomes your second nature. And this is how like it becomes one of the parts of building that inclusive, trustworthy space where designers can come in and just talk about all things design and get feedback on it. So I think that structure and that rigor is really important while setting up any kind of like critique.
Kristen, how do you feel like making those reps possible and safe happens? Like, because you sort of create scaffolding and structuring and education around that. Like, if we want to invite people into a safe space where reps can happen, like, how do we create that space for those types of conversations?
It's a great question. I mean, first off, I'd like to just acknowledge that shifting culture of any kind is hard. So that is one of the barriers in and of itself is you have to acknowledge and understand the current culture to be able to shift the culture. That fear and psychological safety is something that has come up in this conversation. And one of the ways that we have been building towards that is just by addressing the topics. So we talk about fear, we talk about psychological safety, what needs to be present when you're having a disagreement. Don't run from that disagreement. Sometimes I think of it as running to the fire. Like we want to be able to give people the skills to run to the fire in a way that's useful. No, we're not telling them to run into a burning building, but that's part of it, is just really helping them also practice it. Practice, I think, is one of the most important parts. We could give articles, we could give education resources. If we're not giving them opportunities to practice it in a safe space, to again, get it into their muscle memory, I'm not sure how else we could shift culture. That's one of the best ways I've seen it enacted.
Then this is like getting down to the idea of creating rituals around it. Like, it's a pattern, it's familiar. So what are, I mean, what are some of your rituals and patterns of reliable orientation to a space for critique? And that's open to any of you. Anuruddha, maybe you haven't shared yet in this round. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think definitely yes, creating that ritual. The way I would have I've done it in the past is just kind of like setting clear boundaries on what's expected, what's good, what's like a safe space to bring in topics of any kind. Like reviews are typically like more formal, more kind of like buttoned up. Whereas critiques can be like, yeah, just bring in a paper sketch. Let's talk about that idea. It's a safe space. So setting those boundaries, and then also letting the presenter own the feedback, where they are responsible for coming back and responding to the feedback they have gotten in the session on why have they chosen to include the feedback versus not, so that the audience and presenter, everybody feels that they have a part in the conversation. And over time, it just feels like overall, it just feels like a good use of everyone's time.
This goes to the question we were talking about before we started recording, which is the question of power, right? Is a critique to give you feedback that you can take or leave, or is it, you did this wrong, go make it better, or this has to change? I think that's where, speaking from my past life as a designer, we get very protective. We want to have done a good job. We have made certain choices, and it can be really confronting to have people question your choices. And the question is, who gets to give you feedback that you have to take, and who gets to give you feedback that you can take under consideration? And as you were saying, in the next review, you say, thanks for all the feedback, I chucked it. And this is why.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a combination of both approaches, where I do try to like use a do, try, consider model for critiques, that, hey, do is something like, yeah, this is absolutely, you messed up. It's a design system thing. This is what you should fix it. That there's no kind of like try or consider. Whereas a try or consider feedback can be just chucked out and be like, hey, I thought about it. It doesn't work for me because of all of these reasons. And that's the reason why I'm not doing it. But a do kind of like feedback is like just very black and white.
That kind of framing, this is when I talk about designing a conversation, that kind of fundamental framing, like I saw you, Kristen, go like that's a really nice framing. Like, and that's actually kind of what we were talking about the other day about fixed, flexible, and free. But it's just interesting to me when I think of like rose thorn bud as a really safe way of setting up feedback. Do, try, consider sounds more like stop, start, continue. And it always bothers me that the bad stuff comes first, just in terms of creating psychological safety. Does ordering of the feedback matter, do you think, in your experience? Or do you, Kristen, do you teach an ordering of feedbacking?
I think not necessarily in order, because I think sometimes we get stuck in this. You give a positive and then one positive and two negatives, or two positives and one negative. The order I don't think is as important as having an actual framework. We get into deep debates over which framework to use. So there could be rose, thorn, bud, there could be do, try, consider. I think what's most important is there is a framework that the team agrees with and is enacting. It's a little interesting in the do, try, consider is we try to talk about staying away from solutioning in design critique. And I hear when you're telling someone to do something that it's more directive and a little solution-y. So I wonder if there's a different framework that is used for critique versus reviews. Because I could see a do as a review. That is someone in a position of power telling you this is what you need to do. Or I might have misunderstood that.
Yeah, it's like, yes, the do is very directive. It is like in my experience, I've seen like people in power use that, but I've also seen like just peers use that a lot, where it's just very black and white, where like, hey, I see you've used a button that this is not how we do design system. We usually use like 12 pixel instead of an 8 pixel over here, which is rooted more in kind of like those kind of like systems and guidance in place. But so do feedback is typically, I would say, mostly tactical feedback that then kind of like just more strategic in nature.
Yeah, the way our teams work, the way I've tried to give them context is creative direction versus critique, because I just came from design systems to work. Like I lead the main design system one at Capital One, and there are times where someone's doing the work and we're in a critique setting where we say, hey, if your goal is to accomplish this, that element you're using doesn't have the right hierarchy. You might want to try something else. At the same time, that element is also not the approved design system one. So you sync with that team and get the right element you need. What I try to do in any critique I do with my team, and then I try to give teach in my team, is talk about what's absolute, kind of like the do if needed, but also, even if you're doing that, explain where there's what I call room to wiggle. And it's like, hey, I'm telling you the direction you're heading is not working. I think you should probably consider heading this direction. And I try to give some level of boundaries, because maybe there is something like, hey, you're using patterns that aren't in the design system, or you might be using the right components. That being said, how you choose to work with those components to solve this problem is all you. Put your fingerprints all over that, so that they understand that part of it is like, hey, this is systematic. This is how we work. This is like some of our process, and some of this is okay, and here's where your room to play is within there, so they understand that. The other thing I try to do with leaders in particular is talk about, I kept trying to tell them that the designers or designer needs time to process the feedback that they've given. So don't expect they're coming out of that critique or that feedback session like a shorter cook with a list of things to go make or change. They may need to come back and explore that a little bit, because they've just been bombarded with information. And so what I started talking to them about is, think of critique as a kind of like a off form of research, where this designer is coming to gather insights about what's working, what may not be working, or leading towards us achieving our goals in this design. And they need to go back and process those insights the way we process research insights. And then we come back and give a report. They can follow you up with questions. They can say, hey, we don't know if that's the right approach. Let's have a discussion about that. And here's the reason why. Because I try to get away from the like, I said so you must go do that, or the expectation, as much as I can mitigate it from leadership, that is, well, since I am the VP of whatever, engineering, product, marketing, business analyst, whatever it is, and I said something, they have to go do that now. It's really about establishing in that culture that it's a free change of ideas, and we measure those the same we measure anything else. to try to ensure that we're heading in the right direction.
Kristen, I'm wondering, in the education that you're setting up, do you talk about that journey? Because what Aaron's talking about sounds almost like an extended journey map of critique. The critique happens way before and continues after, and it's not like, oh, boop, it's just the meeting. How do you speak to some of that broader contexting and boundarying in some of the training that you're setting up?
I don't do it alone. So we have another group who has been working a lot on an overall design review framework. So groups like that, they map out the entire process. Here are different kinds of team reviews. Here's where you can get reviews with other experts who are content designers or content strategists. All the way through, you're going to a VP of design and you want to get an approval. So part of it is helping people understand just that there is this larger context of what they're living in. I think also teams work so differently. So making sure, I'm always trying to balance this directiveness, because with education, it's for many, many teams who are doing design at Workday. So always trying to give them some guidance and talk about the ritualization of it, talk about the importance of circling back on the feedback and having deeper conversations. So maybe you want to go deeper with someone from the design system team, schedule a one-off for that. So understanding that they're going to also do it in different ways. Yeah, it's a balance. That's why I'm hedging a little bit, because we're not super directive with it, since the teams tend to work so differently. So we want to give them enough guidance to set them up for success, and then let them kind of adapt.
This just sounds like when I think about designing a conversation, this is about who do we include in the conversation and being intentional about it. Can you over-index on inviting people into the conversation, or is under-ex, which is more challenging, problematic, or common, under or over-indexing on inviting people into the conversation?
I think you can definitely over-index on inviting people to the conversation. If you're in your early design phases and you're showing very incomplete thoughts, I don't think that's a safe space to then take it to your product manager who wants to just pass it to a developer and start building. I mean, I could see it working both ways. It depends on your partnership with your product manager. I think those early conversations I've seen them be very well received when you have the support of your team of other designers and researchers who understand your process of design and what you're trying to accomplish.
I see some nods from the rest of y'all. You want to yes hand?
I was thinking about designing the conversation, and that it depends on the type, and kind of to what Kristen was saying, like what type of feedback or critique conversation are you trying to have? And at what point do you feel like an attendee list makes that conversation hard to manage? And think about what that means, because if you start getting 10, 11, 12 people, you have to start really having some facilitator superpowers to keep that conversation heading with, depending, and unless there's clearly defined roles. Maybe some folks are just observers, but they're observers because they just need to be kept in the know and see if there's opportunity for follow-up. And there's a select few that have chosen, hey, we're very close to the work, we'll be active critique participants in this. And maybe you got a note taker, facilitator, but I try to think about what is going to help us manage the conversation in a way that we get the right amount of insights. And maybe that's where looking to things we have like RACI charts and other just artifacts we might have that define engagement might help there.
This is really, and thanks for mentioning facilitation skills, because I feel like when Aaron and I had you on the podcast, I mean, this is like, wow, going back a couple of years, you and Adam had this attitude of like, it's an organic conversation, we're just like work together. And as you get past the two pizza, maybe you get past the one pizza rule, the conversation becomes very complex. And so turn taking and inclusion and the sort of me time, we time facilitation, having an interfacing where you're doing it becomes really important. I mean, what is the average size? I mean, you're saying 12 is when things get complex, but I'm willing to bet that people are breaking the 2 pizza rule inside of everybody's organization on the regs when it comes to just getting these critiques together. And they're doing it without strong rituals and facilitation skills, I'm guessing, maybe. I mean, not anybody on this call, obviously. I'm not pointing. I'll just say I have done that.
I do appreciate the call out for facilitation, and it reminded me that's one of the things that we do highlight quite a bit is the need for facilitation and kind of helping people. I don't know a vegetarian friendly word, but like beef up their facilitation skills so that they are well prepared for these kinds of critiques.
The beef could mean a beefsteak tomato, and if you follow Aaron on Instagram, as I do, you could just imagine like a really beefy beefsteak tomato. You could beef it up
we
like
protein up. We protein up that.
we protein it up. Well, let's talk about best practices, because, like, you know, on the self perspective, I'm hearing being prepared for a potential barrage, and then also having facilitation skills to manage the barrage, and some sort of a framework to pre-organize the barrage. What else have that's just me pulling out some things that I've heard from this conversation. What else is important from the person who is subject, for lack of a better term, subjecting themselves to this critique? What can they do to set up that critique well to create safety and clarity and optimize for the usability of the feedback that comes out of the conversation? I also heard one other thing, like maybe having a scribe, not doing it all yourself. Dividing some of those rules.
I think one of the basic things that comes to my mind is really creating clarity around this is what I need feedback on, and also this is what I don't need feedback on. I think a lot of people miss out the latter, and people will start like jumping on you, and then they're like, wait, I never wanted feedback on that one thing. So I think just creating that clarity, and then channeling those comments or feedback as they come into these 2 buckets. We're like, hey, great, I appreciate your feedback, but this is exactly what I mentioned, that I don't need feedback on that, and being comfortable doing that. So just kind of like, instead of like, kind of like making sure, empowering oneself to channel that feedback that's coming through, and just kind of like dropping them in these 2 buckets, and kind of like bringing the conversation back on track and getting the feedback that person needs.
You know, I want to know a little bit more about that. Oh, sorry, before we go to you, Aaron, how do you do that? Because I think it's so easy to doubt all of the other, you know, if somebody says, hey, what about that? To say, I don't want feedback on it. I feel confident and strong in that. How do you create that boundary? And maybe, Chris, I hear you nodding on that too, because I think that's not trivial.
Yeah, I think the way I've done it with my team is just like providing them with feedback right after that critique session, where helping like designers on my team grow that muscle, where they don't need me or any design operations manager to jump in and help them facilitate the conversation. And they are themselves empowered to be like, hey, this is really like not what I'm looking for. And also kind of like grounding it back into a design process. So we do have a design process. We have a visual for it. Designers will indicate I am in this part of the process. So I need only feedback at this level. I might need your feedback later, so hold on to that, like in a later part in the process. But right now I'm at this like design defined state of the design process, and I only need this kind of feedback. So not that your feedback is irrelevant, it's not just timely.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Kristen, you want to say more about your nod, and then Aaron, hopefully you remember what you wanted to say.
The nod was not 100% on topic, but it made me think about giving and receiving feedback. We piloted some upcoming design critique or culture of critique education, and the need to be better prepared to give and receive feedback is something that was coming up a lot. That is a general skill whether you're using it for design critique or not. So we also try to highlight the psychological safety or the need for psychological safety for the people who are also in the room as reviewers. So
Mhm.
calling out those different roles that, and it could be a bit hokey, but feedback is a gift, right? They're putting themselves a little bit on the edge by even giving you that piece of feedback. That could feel risky and edgy to some people.
Mhm.
So reminding people that when they're asking for critique, it's the other side of being defensive. Like you might feel defensive when you're getting this feedback, but keep in mind feelings are coming up and it could feel a little unsafe for the person who's giving the feedback as well. So let's try to diffuse this from being something that's personal and think about it in terms of the feedback that you asked for to help improve this design.
Yeah, we almost forget that asking is a kind of power. Right? You did create this space to do this. And as you said earlier, you can say, I don't actually want to get feedback on it. But it does take a lot of self-possession. Aaron, what was on your mind?
This all resonates with me really well. Two things I kind of really try to stress, highlight, ingrain, lean heavily upon my team about are setup and expectation setting. So, hey, we're going to have a critique. It's Monday. We're going to have a critique on Wednesday. Here's the work we're going to review. These are the specific things we're looking for feedback on. Please, we're giving you this now so you can gather your thoughts and not feel like you're put on the spot and have to have give feedback that's triggered by a gut reaction. So hold the feedback, jot down your notes and questions, and we'll talk about it then. Set the expectations for how you want the session to run. We also have Adam and I have kind of always kind of sketched out some rules or loose guidelines for things that we want to keep in mind while we're providing critique. But then on the other side is preparation. Hopefully you can have the presenter and the facilitator talking leading up to that, saying, okay, hey, I may ask for more clarity, so please don't go to the next person, or just keeping that connectedness between the two of them to ensure that the facilitation of the meeting gathers the things they need from it. There's lots of little things to do. Also helping people understand how they might give feedback, right? And this is in that expectation setting and preparation. With my teams, I use just 4 questions. What was the individual trying to achieve? How did they try to achieve it? Was it effective? Why or why not?
Mm.
And pretty much anybody, regardless of their familiarity with critique as a process or a living thing in our process, can usually use those questions to frame their feedback. So the more we give structure around how we want the feedback to be framed, I think it sets us up to have those things where it's oh, thank you for sharing feedback on that. As you recall, we're not going to touch on that one today. If you want to talk outside of this meeting about that, we can talk a little more. We're just not there for that yet, right? And it is, again, even giving feedback is, people don't want to hurt people's feelings. There's so many interpersonal dynamics that come in play. The more structure and framework we can put in place to help people feel safe, that they just have to show up and engage. And it's still on them to take the risk to say something, but there's a supporting process that's set up for a specific culture we're trying to build and a certain type of safety that we're trying to encourage during the conversation.
Any builds or yes ands from y'all?
Just so appreciate some of what I heard, and what Aaron was saying was that frameworks help people relax. It helps them know what's expected of them. And even I relaxed a little bit when I heard him say that. I think it's such a great reminder. And talking about facilitation, it was also that the preparation part. We always say this about workshops, right? People think we're going to have this one workshop, everyone just needs to show up. It's only going to be an hour of your time to facilitate this workshop. And we know that that's not accurate. It takes the preparation and the planning is what really takes the most time to help that be successful. So I also appreciate, Aaron, you highlighting that the work really begins before the critique, that preparation.
Thank you. That's something that should not be unfamiliar to designers who have just over the course of designers doing design, have constantly had to educate others to the importance, the value of why things are the way they are surrounding their work. And this is another area that's no different. We often have to help people understand. And it's not because they're willfully choosing to not understand, but I don't know a lot of data analysts who participate in regular critiques, which is actually unfortunate because design should have known critique. We should always be talking about the things we want to improve, regardless of our craft, our profession. But there is a part of that upfront work. And I think there's post work as well. There is the follow-up to help people understand, like, this is going to continue. So that process that you experienced today, embrace the familiarity instead of the next time we meet and the next time. And you'll start to see people get more comfortable, potentially engage more. You'll see your own team start to find their voice because they're more comfortable because they feel the process protects them. So I just think there's a lot about that pre-work, following up, just the structure, I think is just so key. I mean, it's like you're designing a conversation between a bunch of people. Damn, sounds familiar.
That's music to my ears. And also, like, closing the loop on the conversation. I always get the sense that we do all this upfront prep work, and if you don't close the loop on it, people are like, well, why did they invite me? What did they do with it? People really want to see the impact, and it will also make them much more enthusiastic to participate in the future. I don't think many people think about how I think often about the challengingness of receiving it, but it is also shocking to me that even if you set up a little mock feedback session in a practice workshop, that people are kind of reluctant to give cool feedback. We're sort of want to be nice, and it can be challenging to improve something with only warm feedback. So it just seems like this is a very helpful reminder to me, just to have that mindset of course we need feedback to improve. How could we possibly not need feedback to improve? But also just one thing I heard from you say, Aaron, and I just want to see if this is right, is like, maybe don't facilitate your own feedback sessions.
Unless, I mean,
if there's multiple people's.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a rule follower, but like there is a certain level to, like, if you're presenting, so you're kicking off the meeting, setting the context, presenting your work, fielding questions, taking notes, diving deeper. If you are doing all those things successfully, regardless of your level of experience, take me as your Padawan learner. I need to understand how that works, because I don't know that that's a lot. And even if you somehow pull it off, there's going to be things you miss. That's why I think it is great to keep people engaged through rotating roles. Have different people take notes. Try as much as possible, take them visually so you can build shared understanding, but rotate through who does that. Rotate through different facilitation techniques as well as facilitators if possible. Use different ways of actually facilitating and going around and driving the conversation. All that stuff is really super helpful. We want each person to feel like they're getting the most. And I think one of the things that dawned on me when I was hearing the follow-on conversation before right now was, I don't know how it is in other organizations. I'm making an unvalidated assumption, which is probably bad as a designer, but we live in a very meeting heavy culture, especially now with so much remote work. And so every time you ask someone to come to critique, you cost them something. And they need to know what their return is on that. Hey, that was a productive conversation. My feedback was heard. I'm helping this team understand where we need to head. And if we're meeting our OKRs or our goals, if you leave it open-ended, they don't hear back from you. Well, what did I even get from that? They didn't even tell me like what came of that meeting. I'm probably less likely to accept that invite next time because I have another meeting where I need to be more productive. So a lot of these things are also to help drive engagement as a part of building that critique culture.
I think one thing I want to circle back around on, as shockingly our time goes nigh, I want to talk about what a culture of critique really means when it's not just about design. It's about taking this mindset of designing the conversation around how to get the best feedback, to give the best feedback so that we can grow. If it really is a culture of critique, how does the whole organization ideally participate in this? And I don't know, Kristen, I feel like maybe you, well, because I know that you specifically from our other conversations have an interest in what happens when a designer can't even be involved in a conversation. So there may not be somebody who specifically has the designer's mindset or the facilitated conversation mindset. So how do we set up that culture of critique so that, you know, the technology people and the product managers and everyone has this mindset and is armed well with these skills? Again, militaristic metaphor, just as bad as a mediating metaphor. I don't, but anyway, please take the spirit of the question if you can.
Such a big question.
I know, I'm sorry.
Aaron mentioned, I believe, data analysts, and it really made me want to retract something I said earlier when you were talking about numbers and whether or not you're showing something like inviting other team members. I use PMs as an example of into your design critiques, because I think there are different kinds of design critiques. Like I'm focused right now on my work specifically on the design critiques that are within your design and research teams, because we don't have that muscle built for some people, even within their own teams, to be able to then go out and defend their designs or talk about them in a meaningful way and get great feedback from their product managers who are maybe not as equipped to give certain kinds of feedback. So I feel like I'm not actually answering your question because it is so big, because there's this understanding of design that needs to happen on a general level with all of our design partners and how they can be part of the process. And maybe critique is a way to introduce them into those conversations, to have them be part of it. And my thinking is shifting a little even in this conversation.
What about your thinking has been shifting? That's really interesting and awesome.
Because I was thinking of it very much about within the design team. And I think it just keeps becoming a bigger and bigger conversation. And inclusion is such a big conversation right now as well. So when we get stuck on talking about number of people, we're also talking about who is excluded from the conversation. I think it can be really powerful to exclude people from the conversation. Like building on what Aaron was saying, if it's not someone that you're necessarily going to be able to follow up with, or maybe if it is an expensive meeting for them, maybe they aren't the right people to be in the meeting. So it could be a gift to clearly exclude people from a conversation as well, if it's in a value of their time. Someone yes and me.
Amen.
I was going to say, we do, and I love that, Kristen, you talked about, for me, it's about levels of Zoom, right? We have multiple types of critique. So we have standalone critiques. That could be, hey, you know what, Daniel, if you're free on Thursday, I've got something, there's a form of critique coming up, but I need something a little sooner. Can you set aside 30 minutes for us to chat? There's critique that's just a part of your design process. Maybe it's at the pod level, and that's with your product partner, your engineering partner, as you're working through your agile delivery process. There's broader team, like, hey, our teams are all working on different streams of work. Let's do something where we have them sign up every, we do something once every 2 weeks. You can sign up to have your work. You can demo your, present your work, get feedback. When we start trying to talk about too, is I just started trying to take design out of the conversation actually, and just talk about, let's find ways to create a culture where we talk about our work in productive ways. And here's some things that I've found around feedback. And then I start talking to them. I just, and maybe this is front of mind for me because I just posted some writing on critique and feedback in the context of people and performance management. And I got a lot of questions from my team about that. Like, so do these same principles apply when I'm giving feedback to my direct report? I'm like, actually, a lot of them probably do. Yeah, like you want to give stuff that's actionable. That it needs to be, what's their growth look like, and what is the impact of maybe not doing something or something they're doing really well. And so we can start to find ways for that type of conversation design to work its way into other conversations. Then we just start getting people to actually do critique without knowing they're doing critique, air quotes. If they're just kind of having productive feedback conversations about, hey, that research script might need a little tweaking. project plan, I don't see a little clarity right around here in this section. It's a, next thing you know, PMs are doing it, you know, HR, who knows?
Well, to your point, Aaron, and to your point, Anuruddha, having a sense of the person's intent and curiosity about their intent, and as you said, Anuruddha, where are they in their process, and clarity about what they need to get themselves to the next step. That is, I think that is a pattern that is universally applicable, and maybe one of the reasons why some of the organizations that I've worked with in the past love the idea of design thinking for everyone, because that means that there is some shared scaffolding around, oh, here's the squiggle. Like, where are you at least in the squiggle? Are you at the beginning of the squiggle, or are you really close to the end? And what do you need to get you to move forward? That's really important. Also important is for us to have some closing thoughts. My Lord, where does the time go? Anuruddha, what haven't I asked you about critique and building a culture of critique that's important? Like, what do you have any parting thoughts to share with us before we thank everyone for their time?
I think yes to everything that everyone said. I would say I would specifically talk about like bringing other functions into the design critique process, where I've tried to like do that at a smaller scale, not just with the entire design team, but just like a bunch of designers and one PM. And I've seen that they watch this in action and get influence about. I've like heard so many PMs be like, "Hey, your design team really works very creatively," and I really like the process that you guys used while going through and giving feedback. And I've like had many advocates that we were like, you start off with one PM, a second one, third one, and soon you're kind of like transforming everyone one PM at a time. And then I've seen PMs get together and just do the same. They would not call it a critique. They would call it like brainstorming or whiteboarding. But essentially what they're doing, they're using the principles of critique and trying to like bring an idea. So a PM will pitch an idea to other PMs. As a design manager, I get to kind of like be a spectator to those. And I see that, yeah, you're really like using what you kind of like saw in action in a design team, and you're calling it something else, but that's kind of like how you're building that culture across the company and not just keeping it within the design arc.
Yeah, this is building relationships, building culture one relationship at a time.
Yep.
And I saw, Aaron, you hearted that. Nobody could see that unless they're watching this video. Do you want to share some closing thoughts, and then Kristen will end with you? That's okay.
I hearted it because that's how I felt about it. Yes. No, for me, as long as you're trying to improve something or measure something, you've got an opportunity for it. And I always feel a level of guilt and like I have to tell teams, whether it's in sharing the book with them or giving a presentation, like I have to have some stance on this, right? And that being said, I don't think you can take everything I'm telling you and lay it directly over your organization as a one-to-one. Look at the context of your organization and the things you're trying to do there and see what works for you and try to use these as guidelines to help shape that and then iterate on it. Just practice. Start small, practice, keep going, and just keep trying to have the right conversations, because those of us who are thinking about this are the ones who are responsible for helping create or find those who will partner with us or who can help create that healthy culture of critique within our organizations and with our clients and partners.
Yeah. Amen.
Like, I'll add a last
Oh,
note to it.
No, sure.
I think talking about like sharing resources, I bought 5 copies of Jake Knapp's Design Sprint book, because each time I kind of like give it to a PM, they'll be like, hey, like, what are you looking at? How are you creating these critiques or these sessions together? I will share them, I'll give them my book, and it never comes back. So to buy a new one. and then I give it to a different PM and it never comes back as well. So
No, it's really, I mean, that's a culture of generosity too. Just, you should also give them Aaron's book. It's a good book. Closing thoughts, Kristen, Penny, go.
Earlier, you asked us about barriers, and I think one of the barriers is just that people are busy. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so important to make something like this a ritual, or something that doesn't feel like a big deal every time it happens. It's just part of how we work. And I think part of that is also showing the value. Like, how do we answer the question to someone who comes to us and says, why should I even participate in a critique? Why should I ask for feedback? Showing the value is a big part of people understanding why it should even be a ritual. It's something I'm still working through a little bit, how to answer those kinds of questions to people who don't inherently see the value.
And that, I think that goes back to the importance of closing the loop on the conversation to make people feel like your voice mattered, it was heard, it was helpful for the people who were included in the conversation, but also for the person who invited the conversation, facilitated the conversation. And this is like, if you don't close the loop, then you lose that some conversational momentum somewhere along the way. Well, geez, y'all, where does the time go? I'm super grateful that you all were willing to give up some of your time for this conversation. I know you all agree that better critique, better design of better conversations can save the world, which is why you're here. So thanks very much. I'll call scene. Did everything feel cool? I don't think we got to any dangerous territory.
Nope, all good.
I only felt
Okay.
self-conscious when I mentioned product managers. I'm like, no, I love my product managers. I don't want it to sound like they're not invited.
Yes. I'm always like cross-functional partners.
Yes.
That's safe territory.
Okay. Well, I can include this as a coda, just in case you want to make sure that everyone feels like we love all of our collaborators.
Yep.
And everyone needs to be included in the conversation, but not all at once. One thing we didn't talk about, wait, this is really important. We didn't talk about asynchronous critique at all. Because the question of like, how do we actually include more people? Why does it all have to be synchronous? Why does it all have to be synchronous? Can we just include this? Why does it all have to be synchronous? Does it have to be all synchronous? Kristen just slumped in her chair, everyone.
You said that, I thought, what is life? So much, so much is about synchronous versus asynchronous these days, given the world that we're living in.
Everyone's busy.
Everyone's busy.
So is it possible to the reason why I think we do synchronous is because it engages people / quote unquote forces them to participate. But asynchronous means, as you pointed out, Aaron, gives people to prepare their feedback, gives them ability to think. How can we engage people in asynchronous feedback without too much cross-pollination between each person's feedback so that they don't jump on one thing?
I have a lot of opinions about it. So yeah, here's what I'll say. I'll start with this. There's ideal and there's what's real. That's the value, just something I live by, right?
So true.
It is ideal that asynchronous feedback is productive and doesn't end up being more of a heavy lift than it sounds like. An activity I have team participants go through when we do the critique workshop is we have them critique an unsolicited redesign of Craigslist using that 4-question process, like what are you trying to achieve? We have them critique this redesign. And I say, how did it go? And they're like, oh yeah, we learned how to use the questions. I'm like, cool, any challenges? Well, we didn't know what the intent of the person was. We couldn't ask them. Now, with tools, a lot of our like Figma, XD, InVision, Google Sheets, you have an opportunity.
Loom video, maybe.
Yeah, you have opportunity to provide context there, but it just feels like I have to over communicate so much because when you can't see me, you can be led towards assumption driven thinking when you read my written word, no matter how many emojis I use, and even if they're the right ones, because they might be funny to me but not to you. And so it can work. It's a lot of effort, and you just got to have the right process around it. So that's my very loose, but kind of firmly held opinion.
Yeah. No, that's where like the juice may exceed the squeeze
Yeah.
on that one.
Mhm.
Asynchronous prep, asynchronous follow-up of next steps. A lot of the
Mhm.
things surrounding the conversation can be done
Yeah.
asynchronously to make the conversation go smoother.
Yeah.
That's one opinion I do think is really, that's
Anuruddha, I feel like you wanted to add something to that, and then we're totally
Yeah.
out of time. I'm doing the
I,
world.
Yeah.
I, I, would,
Terrible.
I would
I'm
plus
being
one.
so awful of a host right now.
I'm
I'm
so
so
into
sorry.
this.
No, I would agree with Aaron, and I would plus one that it has to be like that right combination of asynchronous and synchronous, because you mentioned in synchronous, it's more kind of like forcing people to be there. I see it more as like bringing all that energy together. Usually I would always read a pre-read, but when I come to this conversation, based on like the conversation, based on the energy in the room, I would have more ideas. And that's always better than me just kind of like sitting on by myself and just jotting my feedback down and not really knowing what the world thinks about this idea, what other people think about this idea. So yeah, I think it has, I really like the framing of ideal versus real.
Yeah. There is energy of being together. I think that's a nice way of putting it. Like it creates density and, combustion through that density versus like the slow burn of asynchronous can be, I think it's more cat herding, which as we all, is called cat herding because it's not a thing. Anyway, we're well past our time. So, I really appreciate you hanging out and for this extra bit. I think this is actually this is the after show.
Cat herding also takes more time. So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
time is one of the barriers, then the more I have yet to see people fully participate in asynchronous work. It always, like you said, Daniel, winds up being more of chasing people down.
Yeah.
Like Aaron mentioned, you're not in the moment, so you can't answer the question. So then people start to feel like they need to over prepare. When they start to over prepare, this becomes like more and more barriers to entry and makes it more and more of a significant thing, where I prefer to think of it as, here's what we're going to have our weekly design critique. Let's have a conversation.
Right. Then it becomes more of a review. There's a heavier load on it versus just the regular cadence of critique where whoever can comes, it feeds forward the quality of the work. I think that's really, really powerful. And that's really great stuff. I'm so sorry for keeping you all over, but that was really awesome. I'm glad that was good stuff. Does it exist? Maybe. Can it exist? Possibly. But yeah, that's a really, really good reality check from everyone. Thank you so much. Y'all are awesome. I imagine
It's great.
you might have other
Thank you.
places to be.
So nice to meet you all also. Thanks for the
Yeah.
conversation.
I really
nice
enjoyed
to
it. It's
see
great
you,
to meet you
everyone.
all.
Yeah. It's really great to see all of your faces. Thanks for participating. I'll let you know when this is real.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
Daniel.
y'all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.